I did want to talk about this Caleb Williams thing because the quotes about Caleb Williams, so many of them are, man, is he confident? Man, is he arrogant? Man, does he act entitled? And some of it does revolve around NIL. Have you ever heard this quote before? Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. And weak men create hard times. You guys ever heard that? So, everybody I know apparently grew up poor. Right? How do I know that? Ask anybody. Oh, I grew up poor. Really? Yeah. I walked barefoot uphill to school, uphill home, right? It was uphill both ways. It's really a hard route to go to. Right? You ask anybody, no one goes like, yeah, I kind of grew up like upper middle class. Like we belong to a country club. You know, my dad had a good job. My mom had a good job. Nobody's in trouble with law. Everyone's like, dude, my mom and dad, before they got divorced, they fired weaponry at each other, then knives across, and then we lived in the toughest part of town, and nobody spoke English or Spanish or French. It was all, everybody spoke gibberish. You know, like you name it, there is some form of tough upbringing that we all had. And we want to prove, I think, by saying that we're tougher than this generation. And it does stand to reason. You know, it's like, I'll give you an example. My son, last Wednesday night, I take him to basketball practice, and the basketball workout, it's only like 15 minutes away, but at that time of night, it takes like 45 minutes to get there. So we get there, and we had a little miscommunication about his basketball bag. He asked if I had his bag, and I was like, yeah, I picked you up from school. We went and got something to eat. We hung out a little bit, and then we went to your basketball practice. I didn't know he didn't bring his basketball bag to school, so he didn't have his shoes. So he's like, hey, could you just go over to Dick's and buy me a pair? Like, think about saying that to your parents. Like, hey, I forgot my shoes for a practice. Can you just go buy me a pair? Now, the reality is he's growing like a weed, so he always grows out of his shoes. He did kind of need like a practice pair. They're not like crazy expensive. Not like he needs like the nicest or best or whatever. And we did drive 45 minutes one way. It's 35 minutes back. Like, we're really going to go there and just sit there and not practice? That seems very, as opposed to I can go get a pair of shoes and in 10 minutes he can be practicing. Right, but think about how our parents would respond to that. Right? Like, do you remember when you went shopping for shoes with your folks and trying to talk them into buying, the nicest sneakers, and then do you wear them home? Right? Do you wear them home? And then you put the old sneakers into the box? I bring this up because the question about Caleb Williams, the questions about these players, they have, by and large, very few of them will have played. This is Marvin Harrison played at one school, Caleb Williams at two. Most of these guys have played at one or two schools, but this is the last year or two that you're going to have that. You're going to start to have a litany of 3-4 school guys. Why is that important? Well, if you haven't been in one place for more than a year or 2 years, you don't know anything about relationship building and culture building. You haven't been through the tough times. Now, if a kid goes to a school during his freshman year and he doesn't play, well, then he leaves and goes to another program where he can play immediately, correct? So you haven't done I was a backup for 2 years, then a spot starter, then became an all-league guy, and now I got a chance to make some money. Like, they haven't been through that. They haven't been through the hard times which create strong men. And then the strong men create the good times. They've been in the good times, which create the weak men. And weak men create hard times. This is a real thing. There was the Josh Rosen, when Josh Rosen was drafted. You know, there was a lot of Josh Rosen in the personality. Both his parents are Ivy League educated. And the thought was that Josh Rosen, because one of his parents, I believe, is some sort of brain doctor, like the second he gets a concussion, his mom's going to come in and go like, what are we doing? Shut this thing down. We got plenty of money. We don't need it. And it turned out Josh Rosen wasn't good enough to hang out and be in the league long enough. But again, the reality is, or the perception which becomes the reality, is that Josh Rosen, because he came from affluence, because his parents were educated, because he was educated, he didn't really need football. So if the going got tough, he would get going. That's the same thing we think about all these quarterbacks now. Yes, Sammy.
A similar quote, Doug, that it sort of runs parallel to the weak men, strong men quote you just shared. I actually learned this from the John Adams miniseries with Paul Giamatti. But John Quincy Adams, former president, actually said this: "I have to study politics and war so that my sons can study mathematics, commerce, and agriculture, so their sons can study poetry, painting, and music." Yeah. It's a good quote.
Yes. It's totally accurate.
It is,
and look, all of my friends that were better than, not as good, and light years better than in terms of players, like, it's really interesting on what their kids are like. Almost all of them, the kids are just amazing kids. Some of them are spoiled brats, but most of them are like amazing kids, you know, and you always want to send your kid to a better school than, like, I went to public schools, you know. My first 3 years of education in California, K through 3, it was at a school that was bilingual. And it was not a great school. So I had to go up levels for math and for English classes, and until I went to a different program, like 4th through 6th. And then in high school, I went to a public school. So I didn't want my school. There was a big shooting on the tennis courts during my senior year. Like, you don't want that for your kid, right? You want to, on the other hand, when you go to a school of affluence, there's all kinds of other issues. And everyone I know who's quote unquote made it on some level financially, they all like, how do you get your kid to be as bad as we wanted it? And we wanted it because whether it was real or imagined, we thought this was our only way to get out. Honestly, like, I'll tell you another part to it. And you guys tell me if I'm crazy. A motivator for many kids, and I would say myself included, right, is you'd watch a college game, be like, man, don't you want to be on TV? Don't you want to be somebody? It wasn't the money. It was, I love the sports. I love competing, and you could become somebody. And I became somebody because of it. But now you can become somebody just commenting on other people on your phone without ever leaving your home. Right? I don't know who's in the FaZe clan, but my son does. He can name everybody in FaZe clan.
Who?
There's also something. Migos, right? Obviously, they lost what? Takeoff died? It's Takeoff, right? R.I.P. to Takeoff. They're apparently arguing about who's better in basketball when he got shot. Always a smart reason for an argument. But there's another group. I'll text him. He's homesick. That he's like, oh, Dad, you don't know about the Fox group or something like that. Here's all the people that are in it. I like all the rappers that are in it. The point is, like, you don't actually have to accomplish anything. You can just find ways, know the algorithm, have a YouTube page, and comment on people that have accomplished things. And that can be your stardom. So we've taken away the energy some kids have to win financially. We've taken away that some have to make it in terms of into a broader platform where you can become a star outside of your chosen field. And we have all these talented kids that have been talented, have been revered, have been on top 10 lists, top 100 lists, and getting paid at a lower level. Now they get to the NFL where they made it. But in many ways, their locker rooms, stadiums, and some even their salaries were better at the college level. I just think it's a fascinating experiment into what will life look like now that we have players that have been in college when they went through COVID, and then they went through, all this online stuff, which keeps people away from each other, which makes them, and the cell phones make it harder to have them have regular discussions with each other. And then you throw in the fact that they're already famous and they're already wealthy and they don't need it. hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men create hard times. It's going to be interesting to see if that quote proves accurate as this year's draft class matriculates into the NFL.